Charles Fairview was standing in the sunlit foyer of his Connecticut estate when a flicker of movement through the tall French doors caught his eye. Past the clipped hedges and the white stone fountain on the immaculate green of the West Garden, something was wrong. He set down his leather briefcase, leaning forward, trying to make sense of the scene beyond the glass. Maya Williams was on her knees. He blinked, thinking at first she must be pulling weeds or fixing the edge of a flower bed, but then his stomach turned cold. Her hands were trembling. She was clutching at blades of grass, stuffing them into her mouth, chewing desperately like someone who had run out of choices. The house went silent around him. The ticking of the grandfather clock faded. Even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed to stop. Charles felt his chest tighten. He pushed open the door and stepped onto the stone patio. "Maya?" His voice cracked despite himself. She startled. A blade of grass clung to her lip before she brushed it away with the back of her hand. Her eyes, usually calm, focused, were wide and wet, filled with panic. She started to stand but swayed slightly. "What are you doing?" Charles asked. He was closer now, the gravel crunching under his shoes. "Talk to me. Are you sick?" "No, sir," she whispered. "I just saw you eating grass." Maya's gaze flicked toward the kitchen wing of the house, as if something there might leap out and punish her. "Please," she said, almost inaudible. "Please don't say anything." Charles frowned. "Not say anything? Maya, who told you couldn't eat?" Before she could answer, the glass door slid open behind him. Elaine Fairview, Charles's wife, stepped out barefoot onto the patio, her silk robe glinting in the late morning Sunday. She held a porcelain coffee cup in one hand. Her lips painted a sharp red that matched her tone. "What's going on here?" she demanded. "Charles, why are you out here with her?" He didn't turn. "I just found Maya on her knees eating grass." Elaine's nose wrinkled in disgust, not at the horror of it, but at the sight of Maya herself. "I told her from the beginning," she said coolly. "Our kitchen is for family. We don't have people like her in there." "People like her?" Charles finally turned. Elaine sipped her coffee slowly. "Look at her. That skin, that smell. She's not to be near our food. Standards are standards." "W." Charles felt heat rise to his face. "Standards? She's starving. You banned her from the kitchen because she's black?" "I banned her because this is my house and I will not have dirty hands touching what we eat," Elaine snapped. "If she wants to feed herself, she can bring her own bread like the rest of the help. We pay them well enough." Maya's hands clenched her apron. She didn't look up. Charles turned back to her, his voice softer now. "Is this true? You're not allowed to eat here?" Maya's throat worked. "If I step into the kitchen again, she said she'd throw me out," she whispered. "I send every dollar home. My son's in Atlanta, sick. If I lose this job—" Her voice broke. "He won't survive." Charles stood still, the wind stirring his blazer. The words hit him harder than any boardroom betrayal, harder than any market crash. In his own home, under his own name, a woman had been forced to chew grass to keep a child alive hundreds of miles away. He looked at Elaine. "Did you know about her son?" "I don't ask about private affairs," Elaine replied. "It complicates discipline." Something in Charles snapped. He stepped toward Maya, then dropped to one knee in front of her. Elaine's breath caught in her throat. Maya gasped, unsure what to do. Charles looked up at Maya, his voice low and unsteady. "Forgive me, not just for this moment, for everything I let happen, in my house, in my name." Maya's lips parted, but she couldn't speak. "It ends today," he said. "Do you hear me? This will never happen again." A gust of wind moved through the garden, stirring the lavender and sending a few petals drifting across the grass. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen, an heiress of cruelty, a man of means, and a woman made to kneel by hunger. Only now, it was the billionaire who knelt, and in Maya's chest, somewhere beneath the shame and exhaustion, a faint, unfamiliar feeling flickered. Not yet forgiveness, not yet trust, but the smallest spark of hope. Maya didn't sleep that night. Long after the sun dipped behind the trees and the house lights dimmed, she sat curled on the edge of her narrow cot in the servants' quarters, knees pulled to her chest. The room was cold, not from the weather but from something else, something older than winter, the kind of cold that sank into bone, into memory. Outside her window, the garden lay still, moonlight casting silver streaks across the lawn. She could still taste the earth on her tongue. Earlier that day, she'd watched Charles Fairview, a man of inherited power and quiet wealth, kneel in the grass before her. He hadn't looked embarrassed. He had looked ashamed. No one had ever done that for her. But shame wasn't a solution, and rich men's words had a history of evaporating when the world came knocking. Down the hallway, the house creaked with its usual nighttime rhythms. Pipes groaned. The distant hum of the central air purred through the vents. Somewhere, a dog barked once and fell silent. And then a soft knock. Maya stood, heart thudding, and cracked open her door. Charles Fairview stood there, alone, in a gray sweater and slacks, hair still damp from a shower. He held a small brown paper bag in one hand. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said. "You didn't." He looked over his shoulder, as if making sure they were alone. "May I come in?" Maya stepped aside. The room barely had space for two. A twin bed. A tiny dresser. No photos. No color. He handed her the bag. "It's just soup. From my own kitchen." She held the bag like it might bite her. "Your wife said." "I don't care what she said." Maya looked at him. "You should." "No," he said, firm now. "I shouldn't." He paused. "She doesn't speak for this house anymore." Maya set the bag on the dresser, untouched. "I'm not trying to earn your forgiveness," Charles said. "I just want you to know I'm not going to pretend yesterday didn't happen, and I don't expect you to pretend either." Her arms folded across her chest. "It's not about pretending. It's about surviving." He nodded slowly. "Can I ask you something?" She hesitated. "Yes. Why didn't you tell anyone? About your son? About anything?" Maya's eyes flicked toward the ceiling. "Because poor people don't get to explain. Not without being accused of excuses. And black women. We're expected to be strong, silent, and invisible. I've learned that silence keeps roofs over heads. If you feel that Maya is truly a heartbreaking character, give her a like. And don't forget to comment where you're watching this video from. Who knows? Someone right near you might be watching it too." Charles said nothing for a long moment. Then, softly, "I'm sorry you ever had to learn that." She looked at him. "Apologies don't feed children. Neither does silence," he said. Maya blinked. For a second, it seemed like she might say something more, but she turned away. "Thank you for the soup." He left without another word. The next morning, the house felt different. Charles summoned the household staff, groundskeepers, housemaids, kitchen crew, drivers to the East Lounge. It was a room usually reserved for cocktail hours and charity brunches, not staff meetings. Elaine was notably absent. Maya stood near the back, arms crossed, trying to read the room. Some looked curious. Others, nervous. A few looked like they wanted to bolt. Charles stood in front of the fireplace, his posture unguarded. "I want to be clear," he began. "I was unaware of the rules that have been enforced in this house. I accept responsibility for not knowing, but I will not allow them to continue." A murmur rippled through the staff. "From this moment forward," he said, "every staff member will be granted access to the kitchen during designated hours. No one will be denied food or rest. If you work here, you eat here. Period." No one moved. "And if you've ever been punished, spoken down to, or made to feel less than human, my door is open, to all of you. I want to hear your stories. I can't fix what I ignore." One of the gardeners, an older man named Raphael, raised a hand. "Sir, are you sure this is allowed, Mrs. Fairview?" Charles raised his voice. "Mrs. Fairview no longer sets policy in this house." The silence was thunderous. Maya's eyes flicked toward the others. Some looked relieved. Some skeptical. But something had shifted. A current of possibility. Later that afternoon, Charles visited the family attorney. He began the process of transferring household authority back into his name, finances, management, staffing. Elaine had held that power for years, inherited it through marriage, wielded it like a club, but not anymore. When he returned home, Elaine was waiting in the living room. She was seated on the leather settee, legs crossed, fingers wrapped around a crystal tumbler of scotch. "You're making a fool of yourself," she said without looking at him. "No," he replied. I'm just seeing clearly for the first time in years. She stood. They'll take advantage of you, Charles. That's what they do. You show weakness, and they'll eat you alive. He looked at her calmly. No, they'll finally eat. That's the difference. That night, Maya sat by the window again. This time, the air didn't feel quite so cold. The garden still shimmered beneath the moonlight, but it no longer looked like a place of shame. She didn't trust him yet, not fully. But in a world where silence had been her only defense, a voice speaking on her behalf was a sound she hadn't known she needed. And it was only the beginning. Maya woke before dawn, as she always did. The house was still asleep, the hallways empty, the air heavy with the smell of polish and old wood. She padded across the small room barefoot, pulling the curtain aside. Out in the west garden, the dew lay like glass beads on the grass, the same grass she had chewed just 2 days before. Her stomach tightened at the memory. She'd been in service long enough to know words could be dangerous. A maid who complained lost her job. A black maid who complained was marked as trouble, no matter how careful she was. And trouble didn't pay for medicine in Atlanta. Trouble didn't keep a sick boy alive, so she had swallowed her hunger with the same discipline she'd used to swallow her anger. Until Charles had walked out of those doors and seen her. Downstairs, the kitchen hummed with a different energy now. The cook, Mrs. Keating, had laid out oatmeal, toast, and a large pot of coffee. The staff drifted in, hesitant, casting glances at the doorway as if expecting Elaine Fairview to sweep in and reverse everything. She didn't. For the first time since Maya had arrived, someone handed her a plate. You might as well eat, Mrs. Keating said softly. It's going to be a long day. Ugh. Maya sat at the end of the staff table, spoon trembling slightly in her hand. She took a small bite, then another. She'd forgotten the taste of warm food eaten without fear. Around her, the staff murmured quietly. Some were grateful, some skeptical. The shift in the house was so new it felt like borrowed air. Upstairs, Charles stood in his study staring at a row of family photographs. He could still see the look on Maya's face in the garden defiance and shame braided together. He thought about the way she had shielded herself even while starving. She hadn't begged him for anything. She'd simply endured. His phone buzzed. It was a message from his corporate office. Another investor breakfast. Another media query about his wife's absence from a charity gala. He set it aside. For the first time in his life, the noise of business felt small. At 10 o'clock he called for Maya. She came to his study quietly, in her pressed uniform, eyes wary. She stopped at the threshold, not crossing it without permission. You wanted to see me, sir? Come in, please, sit. She remained standing. He rubbed the back of his neck. Maya, I need to understand. Why didn't you tell me? About the kitchen, about your son, about everything. She took a breath, still holding herself upright. Because people like me don't get to explain. Mr. Fairview, we get to be silent, or we get to be gone. That's the choice. Charles leaned forward. You really believed I wouldn't listen? Her eyes met his for a second. Sir, it's not about belief. It's about history. She gestured slightly at her dark skin. When someone like me makes trouble in a house like this, it's never the lady of the house who pays. It's the maid. He swallowed hard. I learned that when I was 12, she continued. In Savannah, my aunt cleaned houses. A man accused her of stealing a watch that turned up later in his own drawer. She lost her job, and nobody apologized. That's the kind of lesson you don't forget. Charles sat back. And? You've been carrying that lesson ever since. I don't have the luxury not to. He was silent for a long moment. Outside the window, a sparrow hopped along the balcony rail, then flew away. Tell me about your son, he said finally. Her hands clenched. His name is Elijah. He's 8. He was born with a heart defect. The surgery is expensive. The medication, she trailed off. I send everything home. Every dollar. I live on coffee and bread. Sometimes not even that. Charles stared at the papers on his desk, seeing them without seeing. Does he know? No. I tell him I'm eating fine. I tell him I'm strong. She gave a small, bitter laugh. It's a mother's job, isn't it? Charles rose from his chair and crossed to the window. He had built his reputation on solving complex problems, on spotting flaws before they collapsed a deal. Yet in his own home, a woman had been starving under his roof and he hadn't noticed. I can pay for his surgery, he said quietly. Maya's head snapped up. No. He turned. No? I'm not a charity case, she said, voice steady. I'm a worker. I take a wage. I earn my keep. If you want to help me, treat me like a person, not a project. He held her gaze, then stay, not as a maid, as house manager, equal pay, real benefits. You'd oversee the staff, no more silent suffering. She hesitated. And your wife? I'll handle Elaine, he said. Maya looked away. Her instincts told her to refuse. But the thought of another day chewing grass, another night wondering if Elijah's heart would fail before she could save him, it made her throat tighten. I'll think about it, she murmured. That's all I ask, Charles said. Later that day, Maya walked through the house in a kind of daze. The walls she had scrubbed, the floors she had polished, they looked different now, like a stage set. In the kitchen, staff members whispered about changes. In the hallway, someone had pinned a small sign near the staff entrance. Meal times. 7, 9 a.m., 12, 2 p.m., 6, 8 p.m. It was written in Charles's handwriting. When Elaine swept past her on the stairs, Maya lowered her eyes. Elaine's perfume left a trail of cold citrus behind her. Enjoy it while it lasts, Elaine murmured under her breath. He'll tire of playing savior soon enough. Maya said nothing. She had learned long ago that some words weren't meant to be caught, only to drift away. That evening, she sat by her window again, soup steaming in a chipped bowl on her lap. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the sharp claw of hunger twisting inside her. She thought about Elijah, about his small hand in hers when she'd said goodbye the last time. She didn't trust Charles yet, but maybe, just maybe, there was a crack in the wall big enough to let in a little light. Outside, the garden glimmered in the moonlight. The grass looked almost silver, and though she would never forget what she'd been forced to do there, she told herself quietly, this is not where my story ends. The following morning, the sun rose over the Fairview estate like it always had, slow, golden, cutting across the dewy lawn and waking the crows in the oaks. But inside the house, nothing felt ordinary. The walls, once pristine and silent, now echoed with something new, uncertainty. Maya walked the corridor near the dining hall with measured steps. Her uniform was crisp, her posture straight, but her thoughts tangled like a storm gathering at the edges of calm. She had spent the night replaying Charles's offer over and over, weighing it like gold in a pan. House manager, equal pay, respect. It sounded like a dream, but dreams, in her experience, had a habit of turning sharp. She passed the grand staircase and saw Charles at the base of it, flipping through his planner. He glanced up and gave a small nod, not a command. A gesture of acknowledgement, that alone told her things were shifting. But upstairs Elaine was plotting. In the master bedroom, Elaine Fairview sat at her vanity, brushing her sleek blonde hair in long, methodical strokes. Her reflection stared back with icy precision. She wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by the help. Her husband's sudden change of heart felt like betrayal. She didn't fear Maya Williams, she loathed her. That girl had walked in with her cheap shoes and quiet ways and upended everything. Elaine had spent years constructing an empire of etiquette, silence, and boundaries. And now a maid was being elevated, empowered? Not in her house. Elaine picked up her phone and dialed. Yes. Harold, we need to discuss the estate staffing contract. And I need an audit on discretionary expenses, specifically in payroll. Yes. Right away. Downstairs, Charles met Maya near the study. He gestured toward the doors. You have a minute? She nodded, following him inside. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Charles closed the door behind them. I spoke to my legal advisor, he said, cutting straight to it. The household accounts are in my control now. Elaine's access has been frozen. Any changes in staffing, pay, or structure, those decisions fall to me. Maya crossed her arms. So it's official. Yes, he said. And if you accept the position, I want your voice at the table, scheduling, budget, everything. She was quiet for a long time. And what happens when your wife decides I'm too much of a disruption? His mouth tightened. She already has, but I'm not backing down. Maya studied him. You don't know what it's like to be seen as expendable. No, he admitted. But I'm learning what it's like to be ashamed. He handed her a small envelope. This is the first paycheck at the new rate. Think of it as a beginning. She opened the envelope slowly. It wasn't charity. It was payment for her value for once. I'll take the position, she said. A flicker of something crossed Charles's face. Relief. Respect. That afternoon, Maya took her place in the kitchen, not at the sink or broom closet, but beside Mrs. Keating, reviewing schedules and supply lists. Her presence sparked more than curiosity. Some of the staff whispered. One of the younger maids, Selena, gave her a thumbs up behind a cupboard door. But not everyone welcomed the change. Near the loading dock, Bernard the groundskeeper pulled her aside. You think they'll let this last? He asked. You're the first one in 20 years to get promoted above maid without a scandal or a resignation. Elaine's not going to sit quiet. I know, Maya said. But this house is changing, one way or another. Meanwhile, Elaine made her first move. She hosted a private luncheon on the patio for several of the estate's longtime donors and society wives' friends, who still whispered with velvet malice behind manicured hands. The champagne flowed freely, so did the gossip. Elaine painted herself as a victim, a husband overtaken by guilt, a maid manipulating sympathy. She used phrases like disruptive energy, boundary overstep, and most carefully, cultural differences. Her guests nodded solemnly, but a few, to her quiet horror, asked questions she hadn't expected. Is it true she was starving? One woman whispered. And your husband knelt to her? Asked another. Elaine forced a laugh. Oh, you know Charles, always the dramatic one. But something in the room had shifted. Even among her allies, the optics were changing. Pity didn't sit well on billionaires, not in today's climate. Back inside, Charles sat alone in the study, staring at the fire. He hadn't told Maya yet, but he'd already arranged a specialist consult for Elijah. No strings attached. Just access. He hadn't built his fortune to hoard it, not anymore. Maya, for her part, began cleaning out the old supply room near the back staircase. It would become her new office. She moved carefully, tossing out moldy binders, cleaning shelves that hadn't been dusted in years. Near the back of the shelf, she found a torn page tucked between books, an old roster of past employees. Most names were crossed out. One line caught her eye. D. Robbins, terminated, May 2006, conflict with Mrs. Fairview. She stared at the name, her fingers tightening around the brittle paper. She remembered hearing whispers in her first month, a maid, who had talked back and vanished overnight. The house had always kept its secrets, but not anymore. That night, Maya stood in the kitchen window, sipping tea made with real sugar, not packets from the staff lounge. Her body was still tired, her heart still cautious, but in the silence of the night, she let herself feel the beginning of dignity. A storm was coming. Elaine would not yield quietly, but Maya was no longer the woman who chewed grass to survive. She was standing now, fully, and she wasn't alone. The morning after the garden luncheon, Elaine Fairview stood at the top of the stairs, arms folded across her silk robe, eyes narrowed in disdain. Below her, Maya moved across the foyer with quiet confidence, clipboard in hand, delegating tasks to the cleaning staff. She was no longer in a maid's apron. She now wore a simple, crisp blouse and slacks, with a gold name tag pinned to her chest, Maya Williams, house manager. Elaine gripped the banister. The sight of that woman, her skin, her presence, her authority moving freely through Elaine's home, ignited a cold fury. It wasn't just personal. It was symbolic. A line had been crossed, one that Elaine had spent decades guarding, and now, Charles had allowed the help to believe they belonged. She descended the staircase slowly, each step as deliberate as a judge entering a courtroom. Maya glanced up and gave a polite nod. Good morning, Mrs. Fairview. Elaine didn't respond. Instead, she circled her like a cat, sharp heels clicking across the polished floor. I see Charles is still playing savior. That's always been his weakness. He confuses guilt for growth. Maya didn't flinch. Your husband gave me an opportunity. I intend to earn every inch of it. Elaine smirked. Oh, darling. You think this is about work? This is about territory. And you're trespassing. Maya lowered her clipboard. With all due respect, this house is no longer your battlefield. Elaine's voice dropped. Everything in this house is mine. Every wall, Every tile, including the rules. And you? You're a guest with a ticking clock. Maya straightened her shoulders. I'm here to work, not argue. Elaine leaned in slightly. Then do yourself a favor and remember your place before you forget what you had to eat to stay here. Maya's eyes didn't waver. What I ate then says more about this house than it ever did about me. And with that, she walked away, clipboard tucked to her chest like a shield. Later that day, in the West Wing sitting room, Charles received a call from his estate attorney. His face grew still as he listened, nodding once before hanging up. He summoned Maya. There's been a complication, he said, motioning for her to sit. Elaine's challenging the restructuring. Legally. Maya raised an eyebrow. Can she do that? She's arguing that the household operates under a separate marital trust one she manages. She's claiming I overstepped by reassigning staff positions without her consent. Maya's jaw tightened. So this wasn't just about control, it's about ownership. Charles nodded. She's trying to trigger a clause that could remove me from full control of the estate if I'm found to have mismanaged assets. Maya blinked. I'm the asset, aren't I? His silence was answer enough. She rose. Then it's time I stop being silent. The next day, Maya walked into the staff lounge with a small legal pad. The other employees quieted as she stood before them. I need to ask something of you, she said, but only if you're willing. She explained what Elaine was doing, how she planned to use technicalities and legal webs to erase the changes Charles had made and Maya along with them. If any of you have experienced mistreatment, Maya said, verbal abuse, denied food, pay threats, anything, you have the right to speak. Isidig. A murmur ran through the room. Raphael, the gardener, raised a hand. You think anyone will believe us? I think they'll have to, Maya said. If enough of us speak, if enough of us stand. Selina, the young maid, stood. Mrs. Fairview once slapped my hand away from a tray and told me, your hands don't belong near porcelain. I still have the scar. Raphael added. She docked my pay once for tracking dirt on the marble. I was repairing her irrigation pipe. More voices followed. Maya wrote down every word. By sunset, Charles and Maya sat in the study, with a growing stack of statements from the staff. Charles reviewed them in silence, face pale. This house, he muttered. It's worse than I knew. Maya placed her hand gently on the folder. It's not just this house. It's a system. But the difference is, you're choosing to see it now. Charles looked up. We'll take this to arbitration. I'll have the attorneys draw up statements. Bring in an independent investigator. Good, Maya said, but I want to testify too, in my own name. He hesitated. You don't have to. I do, she interrupted, because this is bigger than food, bigger than Elijah, bigger than me. People need to hear it. And I'm done hiding behind closed doors. 2 days later, in a quiet legal chamber in Stamford, Maya took the stand. Elaine sat across the room, lips tight, dressed in pearls and a pale blue jacket. She never looked at Maya. Not once. But Maya's voice was steady. She told the panel about being banned from the kitchen, about skipping meals to send money home. She described eating grass because she couldn't risk her job, couldn't bear to fail her son. She didn't cry. She didn't dramatize. She simply told the truth. When the staff statements were read aloud, Elaine's composure cracked just once when Selina's story was confirmed by an old medical record. Her expression grew tight, jaw clenched. Still, she said nothing. When it was over, the panel adjourned to deliberate. Maya stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. She didn't feel triumphant, but she felt lighter. Charles joined her. Whatever they decide, she said quietly, I'm proud of what we did. He nodded. So am I. They stood in silence, side by side, no longer billionaire and maid, just two people trying to rebuild a house where no one had to be silent to be safe. The sky over Stamford was gray and thick with low-hanging clouds when the verdict was delivered. Inside the legal chamber, the panel of arbitrators returned to their seats with solemn faces. The room was quiet. No jury. No cameras. Just old wood, clean suits, and tension that sat like stone in the center of the room. Charles Fairview sat straight-backed, his hands folded calmly in his lap. Maya, seated beside him, held herself with quiet grace. Her heart beat fast but steady, no longer driven by fear, but by something deeper: resolve. Elaine, across the room, sat flanked by her attorneys. She looked every bit the socialite matriarch: perfect posture, tailored linen dress, and pearls that glinted under the recessed lighting. But her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. For once, her confidence was cracked. The lead arbitrator cleared his throat. After reviewing the testimony of Mr. Fairview, Miss Maya Williams, and the sworn statements provided by household staff, the panel finds no breach of fiduciary duty on the part of Mr. Charles Fairview. Furthermore, the proposed restructuring of staff authority and payroll adjustments are found to be within his legal purview as co-executor of the household trust. Elaine's jaw tensed. She didn't speak. The arbitrator continued. This panel further recommends a full HR compliance audit of the Fairview household staff operations dating back 10 years, effective immediately. A stunned silence followed. Charles glanced at Maya. She didn't move, didn't smile, but her eyes brimmed with something close to vindication. Elaine stood abruptly. "This is absurd. You're going to let her," she pointed to Maya with a delicate, venomous finger, "undermine decades of structure, discipline, tradition." The arbitrator raised a hand. "Mrs. Fairview, your behavior is part of the concern that initiated this hearing." Elaine's mouth opened, then shut. She turned on her heel and walked out without another word, heels clacking down the marble hallway, her legacy unraveling with each step. Outside, the wind had picked up. Maya and Charles emerged from the building into a gust of October air. Maya pulled her coat tighter. The courthouse doors shut behind them like the end of a chapter. "You did it," Charles said. "No," Maya replied, eyes still on the horizon. "We did it." He nodded. "You know, this could become something bigger." She raised an eyebrow. "You standing up like that, speaking your truth in front of power?" he said. "You could lead something. I don't mean just this house. I mean, beyond these gates." Maya gave a short breath of a laugh. "I just wanted to feed my son. I didn't plan on a revolution." "Most revolutions don't start as revolutions," he said. They rode back in silence. The car rolled down the long driveway of the estate, past the iron gates, past the swan fountain, and came to a stop at the front steps. Waiting by the front door was Selena. She looked nervous. "What is it?" Maya asked as she stepped out of the car. "There's someone here to see you," the girl said. "In the garden." Maya's brows furrowed. She followed the path toward the west garden, the place where this story had begun. There, standing near the hedge, was a tall woman in a red wool coat, holding a duffel bag in one hand and a boy's hand in the other. "Elijah?" Maya whispered. Her son smiled softly, weakly but real. The woman stepped forward. "I'm Sheila. Your sister sent for me when the court ruled. Said you might need someone to bring him up here." Maya's knees gave slightly, but she caught herself. Her eyes filled as Elijah let go of Sheila's hand and ran wobbly, careful, into his mother's arms. "I told you I'd come for you," Maya whispered, holding him close. "I told you," Sheila nodded. "The surgery. It's scheduled next week. You'll be able to take him. Your name's already on the patient file." Charles stepped into the clearing, watching from a short distance. When Maya looked up, he simply said, "I made a promise." She stood, holding Elijah in her arms. "I can't repay you," she said softly. "You already did," Charles replied. "You gave me back my conscience." That night, the house was quieter than usual. Elaine had checked into a hotel in the city. Staff moved freely through the halls. The kitchen buzzed gently, not with fear, but with conversation. Maya settled Elijah into the guest suite, a soft bed, warm lights, a small basket of toys left by the housekeeper who had children of her own. The boy fell asleep quickly, worn from travel and relief. Maya stood at the window, staring out at the moonlit garden. She remembered the feel of grass between her fingers, the humiliation, the hunger, but now standing in the same place she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Peace. Not security. That was still far away. But peace. The knowledge that she was no longer surviving alone. Charles joined her at the doorway. "He looks like you," he said. Maya smiled softly. "He's stronger than me." "Then we protect that strength," he said. For a while, neither spoke. The garden glowed in silver light, a soft breeze rustling the hedges. The same space that had once borne witness to her desperation now stood quiet, gentle, changed. "I think it's time we rebuild this place," Charles said. "From the inside out." "Zero," Maya nodded. "Not just for me. For everyone." "Yes," Charles said. "Everyone." 2 weeks passed. The leaves on the Fairview estate turned from green to copper, and the air took on that early November chill, sharp enough to bite, soft enough to feel nostalgic. The mansion, once a symbol of order and silence, now pulsed with something else, life. Every day brought change. The staff no longer whispered in corners or glanced over their shoulders before laughing. They walked taller, spoke louder. Maya noticed the small things: Mrs. Keating humming while baking cornbread, Raphael teaching the young maid Selina how to prune the rose bushes with patience instead of scolding. The air had shifted, and at the center of it all was Maya. She now had an office on the second floor, across from Charles's study. Nothing too grand, just a clean room with a desk, a calendar, and a corkboard lined with schedules, feedback slips, and post-it notes scribbled with grocery lists and names of staff birthdays. She kept a photo of Elijah in the corner of the desk, tucked behind a stapler. Elijah had undergone the first part of his surgery just 3 days prior. Charles had arranged for a private specialist at a children's hospital in Boston, and Maya had stayed in the room with him the entire time, never once letting go of his hand. Now, he was recovering back at the estate in a guest bedroom transformed into a soft, colorful haven. Every morning, Maya checked on him before work. And every evening, she returned with a cup of tea, a warm plate, and a bedtime story. But that morning, something was different. A black SUV pulled through the front gates. From the kitchen window, Maya saw the sleek vehicle roll up the drive and park at an angle imposing. Out of place. A man in a pressed suit stepped out. He wore sunglasses despite the cloudy sky and carried a small leather briefcase. Mrs. Keating caught her eye. "That's a lawyer's walk if I've ever seen one." Maya's heart sank. She excused herself and made her way to the front door. Charles was already there. The suited man offered a courteous nod. "Mr. Fairview, Miss Williams, my name is Damon Calloway. I represent the board of directors for Fairview Holdings." Maya's stomach clenched. This wasn't about the household. This was bigger. Charles kept his expression neutral. "What can we help you with?" Calloway handed over an envelope. "It's come to the board's attention that recent events at your personal estate have raised concerns, particularly regarding press coverage, legal arbitration, and employee testimonies related to racial discrimination." "I'm aware," Charles said calmly. "The board is asking for reassurance that these changes in your household will not affect your leadership in the company. Investors are wary. There's talk of ethics committees. There's talk of conflict." Maya watched Charles carefully. He took the envelope and opened it without flinching. His eyes scanned the document, no panic, no hesitation. Then, he folded it. "Tell the board I appreciate their concern. But my leadership begins at home. If they'd like to discuss ethics, I'd be more than happy to invite them to meet the people their profits have ignored." Calloway cleared his throat. "That's bold." Charles smiled. So was emancipation. Bold doesn't mean wrong. The man said nothing more. He turned and walked back to the SUV, leaving behind a gust of cold wind and unspoken warning. After he left, Maya turned to Charles. "They're coming for you now. Let them," he said. "I've built enough to weather a storm, and I'd rather lose money than my soul." Later that day, Maya gathered the staff in the East Lounge. She stood beside Charles as he explained the visit, the possible backlash, the reality that the house's transformation might have consequences. "If things shift," he told them, "it won't be because we stopped caring. It'll be because we kept going. And if anyone here feels unsafe, tell us. This is your home as much as mine." No one left. Afterward, Maya found herself walking the garden paths with Elijah, his small fingers curled around hers. He was thinner than she remembered, still pale from the hospital, but curious. "Mom," he asked, "why do you live here now? With the man with the shiny car?" She smiled gently. "Because we needed a place where people saw us, and now they do." He looked up. "Do they see you for real?" She stopped walking and crouched to his level. "Yes. And I see me, too." At the far edge of the garden, near the hedges that had once hidden her from view, a new plaque had been placed in the soil. It was simple, brass, clean. Let no one ever be invisible again. She didn't know who had ordered it. Maybe Charles. Maybe one of the staff. It didn't matter. It was there. That evening, Charles invited Maya to the study. The fire crackled softly. A new painting had been hung above the mantel. A portrait of the estate, painted by a local black artist from Atlanta. He handed her a glass of tea instead of wine. To strength, he said. To voice, she replied. They clinked glasses. I'm starting a foundation, Charles said. To support domestic workers. Legal protection, emergency aid, job advancement. I'd like you to help me build it. Oh, Maya looked at him, eyes steady. Not as a story, not as your redemption arc. No, he said, as your legacy. She nodded. Then I'm in. Outside, the first snow began to fall. Soft and slow. The house glowed from within. Not from wealth, not from gold, but from people. Truth. And change. A different kind of house. A beginning. The first snowfall blanketed the Fairview estate with an eerie kind of silence, the kind that made everything seem gentler, softer, but underneath carried the weight of everything unresolved. The hedges shimmered under a coat of white, and the fountain, once a symbol of opulence, now sat frozen, still. Inside the house, Maya stood at the large bay window in Elijah's room, watching the snow swirl in the pale morning light. Elijah lay sleeping behind her, curled into himself, breathing evenly. The doctor said the worst was over, but every time he coughed, Maya's heart clenched with old fear. She had grown used to holding her breath. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in, she said softly. It was Charles. He peeked inside and gave a nod when he saw Elijah asleep. Can we talk? She followed him into the hallway and shut the door gently behind her. I had a visitor this morning, he said. A woman named Ava Robbins. Maya froze. The name, it sparked something familiar. Something she had read weeks ago. The old maid's name from the employment ledger. D. Robbins. Fired in 2006. The one who'd vanished without explanation. She's David Robbins' widow, Charles explained. Turns out, he was a butler here back when my father still ran the estate. Ava was a maid after him. She came to speak with you. Not me. Maya's stomach tightened. Why? She said she wants to tell you what really happened in this house. No. An hour later, in the west parlor, a room no one had used in years, Maya sat across from a woman in her early 60s, wrapped in a wool shawl. Ava Robbins had the posture of someone who had carried other people's secrets for too long. I've followed the news, Ava said. You're the first one who didn't just leave after they pushed too hard. You stayed. You fought. Maya said nothing. She let the woman speak. I was a maid here for 3 years, Ava continued. I worked under Mrs. Fairview. Back when she was just starting to take over the house, David, my husband, was the butler then. Old school, loyal. He believed in the Fairviews until he didn't. Maya leaned forward. What happened? Ava's fingers twisted the fabric of her shawl. David found out about a financial arrangement between Elaine and a few of the board members of Fairview Holdings. Quiet deals. Bribes. Property. Under phantom names. He confronted her gently, respectfully, but she panicked. She fired him? No, worse. She accused him of stealing. Maya swallowed. They never called the police, but they made sure he could never work again in service. Word spreads fast in elite circles. He died of a heart attack 2 years later. Couldn't find steady work. I stayed quiet because, well, I didn't think anyone would believe me. Maya felt the rage rise slowly, hot, deep, familiar. I found your name in an old staff list, she said. I didn't know the whole story. But I knew something had gone wrong. Ava looked up, her eyes tired but fierce. Now that Elaine's power is slipping, maybe the truth has room to breathe. Maya nodded slowly. If I bring this to Charles, do you understand what that could mean for you? I've had enough silence to last a lifetime. Later that day, Maya met Charles in the study and laid out everything Ava had told her. He listened, eyes darkening as the story unfolded. If what she says is true, it's not just about the house anymore. It ties back to the company, the foundation, my name. Maya studied him. You said you wanted this house rebuilt from the inside out. That starts with facing everything, even the rot. He looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. I'll have a corporate investigator look into it. Quietly. No, Maya said, firm. Not quietly. Not this time. No. The next week, Charles held a press conference not at his downtown headquarters, but on the front lawn of the estate, standing before a microphone with Maya by his side. The snow had mostly melted, revealing patches of dead grass and soil, honest, imperfect, real. I've made mistakes, Charles said. I've inherited silence and didn't question it, but no more. Today, I announce a full internal investigation into past practices at Fairview Holdings and the estate itself, including the treatment of staff under both my and my late father's management. Maya kept her chin high. The cameras flashed. Too many lives have been overlooked in the name of wealth, Charles continued. That ends now. Questions flew from the press. Who was the woman beside him? Why had she been promoted? Was this about race? Was this about guilt? Maya stepped forward. My name is Maya Williams, she said, voice steady. I was a maid here. I was banned from the kitchen, denied meals, forced to choose between my son's survival and my own. I ate grass because I thought no one would care. Silence. But someone did. And now I speak. Not because I'm a victim, but because silence never protected me. Truth did. The microphones caught her every word. There was no script, no spin, just truth. That night, as snow began to fall again, Maya sat in the garden with Elijah bundled beside her. She told him stories not of hunger, not of pain, but of standing tall, of speaking when it was hard, of making sure no one else had to eat shame in silence. He listened, eyes wide. Is this our home now? She looked up at the sky, then at the house, glowing with lights, filled with voices. Yes, she said, it is now. The next morning, the world woke up to Maya Williams's voice. Clips from the press conference had gone viral overnight. Her words, I ate grass because I thought no one would care, were plastered across social media feeds, news tickers, and headline banners. The footage was raw, unedited, and entirely unfiltered. There was no makeup team, no publicist, no polished angle, just truth in a cold garden, wrapped in a wool coat and dignity. And America listened. Maya didn't check the internet when she woke up. She didn't need to. She knew something had shifted the moment she stepped into the kitchen. Selena was already making coffee and paused mid-pour. Maya, she said, voice trembling with awe. You were on Good Morning America. Maya blinked. What? They played the clip, Selena said. Twice. Bernard, the grumpy groundskeeper, stuck his head in through the service door. Heard you made the whole country cry. Maya offered a small smile, but inside, she felt unmoored. None of this had been the goal. She hadn't intended to be seen by millions. She had only wanted to be seen here in this house, by these people. And yet now, she couldn't walk through the estate without someone pausing, thanking her, asking how Elijah was doing. Something intimate had become public. When she entered Charles's study, she found him at his desk, scrolling through emails. You're a phenomenon, he said, not looking up. I didn't mean to be. I know, he said, closing his laptop. But you were honest. That's rarer than talent these days. He handed her a thick envelope. These are the initial applications. Applications? She asked. For the foundation, he replied. Since the press conference, over 200 domestic workers across the country have reached out. They want help. Some want legal support. Others just want someone to hear them. Maya sat slowly, taking in the weight of it. So many. And more will come, Charles said. This is real now, bigger than either of us. She nodded. Her name, her face, her pain, it had become a kind of symbol. But she was no celebrity. She didn't want that. She wanted action. I want to meet with some of them, she said. The ones who reached out. I want to listen. That week, they hosted the first listening session in the East Lounge. No cameras. No press. Just folding chairs, tea, and voices. 5 women came. One was in her 50s, with calloused hands and a soft drawl from Alabama. Another was barely 22, shaking slightly as she spoke of being underpaid and overworked in a Connecticut mansion not far from Fairview's gates. They told their stories. One had been accused of theft after asking for sick leave. Another had been forced to sleep in a garage with no heating. One woman, Lola, spoke of being fired after the wife of the house claimed her skin made the linens smell earthy. Maya listened, never interrupting, never judging. When it was her turn, she didn't repeat the story of the grass. Instead, she told them about Elijah's first real smile after surgery, about the way he hugged her every morning, about the quiet pride she felt in unlocking her office door, knowing she had earned the key. Your dignity doesn't come from their approval, she said. It comes from knowing your worth whether or not they ever do. By the time the session ended, every woman left with contact information for legal help, copies of the new Domestic Worker Bill of Rights, and something more precious, hope. Meanwhile, Elaine Fairview was watching. From a penthouse suite in Manhattan, she read the articles, watched the broadcasts, listened to the radio clips. She saw her name, Elaine Fairview, accused of racial discrimination. Wife of billionaire under scrutiny for labor abuse. She threw her wine glass against the wall. This is a campaign, she hissed. She's orchestrating all of it. Her lawyer, seated calmly on the sofa, sighed. You could have just apologized. Quietly, issued a statement. Elaine turned sharply. Apologize? To her? You're losing the court of public opinion, he said. Even the board's growing uneasy. There are whispers of removing your name from the women's foundation you founded. The optics are toxic. Elaine paced. She's cleverer than she looks. No, her lawyer said. She's braver. Back at the estate, Maya stood in the garden again, this time with a notepad in hand. The garden staff had given her a plot small, quiet, just past the rose arbor. A place to grow whatever she wanted. She planted lavender first, then rosemary. Simple things, healing things. Selena joined her. Can I help? Maya handed her a trowel, always. They worked in silence, hands deep in the earth, side by side. The sun warmed their backs. The breeze carried the scent of thyme and wet soil. And then a voice came from behind them. You're building something. Maya looked up. Charles stood there watching. Yes, she said. Something that can't be bulldozed by lawsuits or shame. He nodded, his gaze drifting toward the budding green. You know, he said, my father once said this garden was for display. It was never meant to be touched. Maya smiled. Then it's about time someone broke the rule. Then, they stood in silence for a long moment. Charles turned to go, then paused. There's something I've been meaning to ask. Maya raised an eyebrow. What? If I gave you full control of the foundation, complete independence, would you take it? Her heart skipped. Why? Because this isn't about me anymore, and you're already doing the work. Maya didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, stained with dirt, and then at the patch of herbs growing beneath her feet. I'll take it, she said, on one condition. Name it. I don't want a statue. I don't want my name on a plaque. I just want it to work. Charles smiled. Then it will. Snow had melted into slush, and the skies over Connecticut hovered in a dull gray haze. The Fairview estate stood tall against the winter gloom, but inside, change continued to settle into the walls like heat returning to a cold house. Maya sat at her desk in the second-floor office, sorting through case files from the foundation, testimonies, inquiries, pleas for help written in neat cursive, in hasty all-caps, in trembling handwriting that had clearly been erased and rewritten. She took a deep breath. She had asked for this responsibility, and she would carry it, but the stories were heavier than she expected. Behind her, the door creaked open gently. Charles leaned against the frame, holding 2 mugs. You forgot lunch, he said. She glanced at the clock. Again? 4th time this week, he said, setting 1 mug on her desk. You need to come up for air, Maya. She leaned back. These people, they're trusting us with their lives. I can't afford to breathe too long. You can't lead if you collapse, Charles said gently. She offered a faint smile. That was almost poetic. He chuckled. Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my reputation. They sipped quietly for a moment. Then Charles cleared his throat. "There's something I want to show you." He led her down to the west wing, an older part of the house sealed off for years. It smelled of cedar, dust, and forgotten memories. "After my father passed," Charles said, unlocking the tall double doors, "I left this wing untouched. Too many ghosts. But last night, I remembered something." The doors creaked open, revealing a long hallway lined with portraits, shelves filled with dusty ledgers, and cabinets of glassware from another century. At the end of the hall was a small room, part storage, part study. Maya stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath her. "What is this?" Charles handed her a faded ledger. "It's a house journal. My grandfather kept it. So did my father. Every major event, every staff change, every complaint. It's all here." "Oh." Maya flipped through carefully. Pages yellowed with time revealed names, dates, memos. She paused when she reached a familiar entry. The 19th of August, 2006. David Robbins terminated. Discrepancy reported by E. Fairview. No formal charges. Her breath caught. "He was never even given a chance to speak," she murmured. Charles's jaw tightened. "No, he wasn't." Maya flipped further. Another name appeared. The 3rd of October 1997. Eleanor Sims dismissed. Disciplinary notice. Spoke out of turn about meal conditions. "Eleanor," Maya whispered. "She's the woman who wrote to the foundation last week." There were more names, notes, pages and pages of erasure masked as order. Maya turned to Charles. "This is proof. This isn't just about you or Elaine. This is systemic. This house was built on silence." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time the house started talking." The next day, Maya held a staff meeting in the formal dining room, not the service quarters. For the first time, maids, cooks, groundskeepers, and drivers sat at the long walnut table once reserved for donors and diplomats. Maya stood at the head of the table with the house journal open before her. "I want you to know what this house has seen," she began. She read the names, the stories, one by one. Some wept, some sat in stunned silence, some nodded as if their own ghosts had finally been named. "This ends now," Maya said, voice clear. "The foundation won't just help people outside these gates. It begins here. With every one of you." Selena raised her hand. "Are we safe to speak now?" "Yes," Maya said. "That's a promise." Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, Maya was invited to speak at the Domestic Workers Alliance conference in Chicago. The foundation's inbox tripled overnight. Donations poured in, not just money, but offers to help. Lawyers, nurses, social workers, counselors. At night, she walked the estate grounds, thinking, planning. One night, near the garden, she found Elijah playing quietly with a puzzle on the bench. He looked up. "Are we going to live here forever?" Maya sat beside him. "Do you want to?" He nodded. "I like the big kitchen now." She smiled. "I do too." He turned to her. "You're like a superhero. Everyone says you fixed everything." Her smile faded slightly. "I didn't fix everything, baby. I just stopped pretending it wasn't broken." Back inside, Charles stood on the second-floor balcony, watching her through the windows below. Elaine had not returned since the arbitration. Her suite remained locked. Dust gathered on her vanity like a quiet rebellion. Charles thought about his father, his grandfather. The portrait gallery that lined the main hall suddenly felt heavier. He was the heir, yes, but what had he inherited, really? He turned from the window and walked down the corridor to Maya's office. She was already inside, sorting the next batch of letters. He paused in the doorway. "You ever think of leaving?" She looked up. "Every day." He smiled faintly. "What keeps you?" She stood, crossing to the window. The garden glowed under moonlight. "I don't want to leave until the house forgets who it used to be." Charles joined her at the window. "Maybe that's why you're the one who belongs here most." Downstairs, in the once-locked west wing, the journal sat open on a display table. A small plaque had been added beneath it. "History cannot be erased, but it can be read and rewritten." And with each story Maya gave voice to, another wall crumbled. The house was changing, not just the furniture or the power, but the soul. It had been 56 days since Elaine Fairview last set foot inside the mansion that once bowed to her every word. The world outside had shifted. The house had changed. But inside her private car that now rolled up the familiar driveway, she sat rigid, still dressed in tailored silence, her hair in perfect coils, pearls clasped tightly around her throat as if they were armor. The driver opened the door. The gravel beneath her heels felt colder than she remembered. At the front entrance, Bernard stood with crossed arms, leaning slightly against the pillar. The old groundskeeper met her eyes without lowering his head. That had never happened before. "Good morning, Mrs. Fairview," he said flat. Elaine offered a tight smile. "Thank you, Bernard. You may resume your duties." "I no longer report to you, ma'am," he replied, nodding once, and walked away. Inside, the warmth of the house greeted her, but it no longer carried her perfume. Instead, she smelled cinnamon, coffee, and fresh paint signs of life that had nothing to do with her. She walked through the foyer, her heels echoing against the marble. The house did not feel like home. It felt like something reclaimed, and she hated it. She reached her suite. It was just as she'd left it, neat, cold, untouched. But something felt wrong. Her eyes darted to the vanity. A letter lay there, folded, addressed in handwriting she recognized but couldn't place immediately. She opened it. "Dear Mrs. Fairview, your suite remains untouched, but your authority does not. Respectfully, Maya Williams." Elaine's breath hitched. Maya Williams. The woman whose name had become a national headline. The woman whose voice had cracked open decades of silence. The maid who had now become something else. Elaine crumpled the note, her jaw clenched. Downstairs, Maya stood by the newly framed journal display in the West Wing when Charles approached her. "She's back," he said simply. "I know," Maya replied. The energy shifted the moment she stepped onto the property. "Should I speak to her?" Maya shook her head. "No, I will." Charles hesitated. "She still sees you as—" "I know exactly how she sees me," Maya said, "but I'm not here to be seen anymore. I'm here to be heard." Elaine was seated in the East Lounge when Maya entered. The room was empty, save for the sound of a grandfather clock ticking somewhere in the background. The two women locked eyes. "I expected this," Elaine said, smoothing her skirt. "You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you?" Maya remained standing. "I've been waiting for honesty." Elaine gave a short, bitter laugh. "You think you've won something, don't you?" "This isn't a contest, Mrs. Fairview," Maya replied. "This is a reckoning." Elaine's eyes narrowed. "You've turned my family name into a scandal." "I didn't turn it into anything," Maya said calmly. "The truth did." "Mah." Elaine stood, walking slowly toward her. "I gave this house structure. I gave it discipline. Do you think any of this," she gestured broadly, "could have lasted without my standards?" Maya didn't flinch. "Your standards were silence, suffering, and fear. I kept order. You enforced a hierarchy built on the backs of people like me. You made me eat in the garden while your guests drank champagne inside." Elaine's face flushed with something between rage and shame. "You humiliated me," Maya continued. "You looked at my skin and decided it was too unclean for your kitchen. I never said—" "You didn't have to," Maya cut in. "You trained the staff to believe it. You poisoned the air with it." Elaine's hands trembled slightly. "I protected this house." "You protected your control," Maya replied. "But that's over now." Elaine's eyes darted to the hall. "So what now? You want me gone? You want my name stripped from the foundation? My face erased from every boardroom I ever entered?" Maya's voice softened. "I want you to understand what you did. I want you to feel what it's like to be powerless in a place that once bowed to you." Elaine said nothing. "I won't humiliate you," Maya continued. "That's your legacy, not mine. But I will not shield you from consequences." "And what do you know about consequence?" Elaine snapped. Maya stepped closer, her voice steady. "I know what it's like to choose between eating and surviving. I know what it's like to watch my son wither in pain because I couldn't afford help. And I know what it's like to feel invisible in a house I cleaned every day." Elaine looked away, eyes glassy but unbroken. "If you want peace, Mrs. Fairview," Maya said, "you'll need to earn it, just like the rest of us." And with that, Maya turned and walked out, her back straight, her dignity intact. That night, Maya sat on the garden bench with Charles, the moon casting soft shadows across the hedge line. "She won't change," Charles said. "She doesn't have to. Maya replied. She just has to face what she built. Charles looked at her. You're stronger than this place. Maya smiled faintly. No, I'm stronger because of what this place tried to take from me. He nodded. What happens next? Maya leaned back, staring at the stars. We make sure no one ever has to choose between silence and survival again. Inside the house, Elaine stood in her old suite, watching the two of them from the second-floor window. She held the crumpled letter in her hand, her name scrawled in firm, elegant handwriting, by the very woman she had once called invisible. And for the first time in years, Elaine Fairview felt something she had never allowed herself to feel. Irrelevant, the snow had finally cleared for good, and with the first blush of spring came the first wave of visitors. They arrived in small groups: nannies, housekeepers, caretakers, women and men in faded coats, worn shoes, some clutching folders, others just holding the hands of their children. They didn't come for photo ops or television spots. They came for answers. And for a place that felt like more than work. Maya stood by the front gates of the Fairview estate, watching them arrive. Her posture was calm, but inside her chest pulsed a quiet storm. This, she realized, was the day the house truly began to serve the people it once ignored. She greeted each guest personally. Some hugged her, others wept, many simply nodded in silent gratitude. By late afternoon, the great hall had been transformed into a communal meeting space. The long dining table was filled with potluck dishes: okra stew, cornbread, spicy plantains, casseroles with family recipes passed down for generations. No one was turned away. There were no uniforms, no staff entrances, only people equal, present, heard. Charles stood off to the side, observing the crowd. He didn't need to speak today. This wasn't about him. Maya took the floor, her voice echoing off the polished wood beams of a house that had once been too proud to listen. Welcome, she began. This estate was built with walls that whispered only to the powerful. We're here today to change that. Not just for this house, but for every home like it. She paused, letting the words settle. For those who have been dismissed, overlooked, silenced, I see you. And this time, you're not alone. A young woman with dark curls stood up. What if our employers don't change? What if they threaten us? Maya met her eyes. Then we fight smart, legally, collectively, and publicly, if needed. Power fears the people who know their rights. The room hummed with agreement. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned, Maya moved from table to table, gathering testimonies, stories, and suggestions for how the foundation could serve better. One woman, Estella, shared a story about being locked in a guest house during a heat wave, her phone confiscated, forbidden to leave. Another man, John from Mississippi, told of being falsely accused of stealing jewelry after asking for a raise. I didn't even touch the lady's necklace, John said. But they called the cops anyway. Maya gripped his hand. You're safe here. He looked around the room, voice shaking. This place don't feel like theirs no more. It feels like ours. Meanwhile, upstairs, Elaine Fairview watched from behind the curtain. Her suite had become a box of ghosts. She barely recognized the music that drifted from downstairs: blues, gospel, laughter. It wasn't the estate she had designed, but it was the house her son had allowed to bloom. A part of her wanted to walk down those stairs, say something, anything, but another part, a deeper, older part, held her frozen. What would she even say? That she was sorry? That she hadn't known? That her fear of losing control had made her cruel? Outside her door, a knock. She hesitated, then opened it. It was Charles. I thought I'd find you up here, he said gently. Elaine turned away. I have nothing to say to her. Charles stepped in. She never asked you to speak. She asked you to listen. Elaine scoffed. Listen to what? Complaints? Grievances? A parade of pity? No, Charles said. To the people who lived beneath your rules. She narrowed her eyes. And what have I become to you, Charles? An embarrassment? You became irrelevant when you refused to evolve, he said. This isn't about shame. It's about truth. And whether or not you want to hear it, Maya speaks with more moral authority than anyone in this house ever has. Elaine said nothing. I'm not asking you to be someone else, he added. I'm asking you to reckon with the version of yourself that allowed suffering to happen under your roof. And then he left her standing there, in silence. Later that night, Maya sat with Elijah in the garden. He was stronger now, his laughter louder, his skin no longer pale from the months of illness. He played with a wooden puzzle gifted by one of the visiting nannies. He looked up. "Why are people coming to see you now?" "Because I told the truth," she said. "Did they believe you?" "Some did. Some took time. But I didn't stop speaking." He furrowed his brow. "Were you scared?" "Every day," she said. "But I was more scared of staying silent." He nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense. A voice interrupted from behind them. "I brought something," Charles said, holding a small wooden box. "It belonged to my grandfather. I think it should go in the archive." Maya took the box. Inside was a set of letters correspondence between early staff members, handwritten records of the household's beginnings. "You sure?" she asked. "I'm sure," he said. "History can't change unless we let it breathe." She smiled softly. "Thank you." As they walked back to the house, the glow from the windows spilled across the lawn. Inside, a new kind of legacy was being built, one not etched in gold, but in stories, service, and truth. The visitors had come, but they weren't leaving empty-handed. They were leaving seen. The morning sun filtered gently through the curtains of Maya's room, painting golden stripes across the floor. Birds chirped from the sycamore trees just beyond the east-facing windows. For the first time in a long while, Maya woke not to the weight of exhaustion, but to a stillness that felt like peace. Elijah was already awake, curled in a blanket on the reading chair, humming softly to himself as he traced shapes in a book of stars she had given him the week before. She smiled and walked over, planting a kiss on his forehead. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" He nodded without looking up. "Are we staying here forever?" "Forever's a big word," she replied. "But for now, yes." She meant it, not because the house had forgotten its history, but because she was shaping its future. As she stepped into the hallway, the house was unusually quiet for a Tuesday. No chatter from the kitchen. No clanging of cookware. No humming from the gardeners out front. Downstairs, Charles stood by the foyer table, holding an envelope in one hand, his face unreadable. "Maya," he said, turning to her as she descended the staircase. "This just arrived. It's from my mother, Elaine." Maya took the envelope with hesitation. The handwriting was sharp and elegant, familiar. "Do you want me to read it first?" Charles asked. She shook her head. "No. If she wrote to me, I'll face whatever's in it." He nodded and walked away, giving her privacy. She sat down on the velvet bench beneath the staircase and unfolded the letter. "Maya, you once told me that truth makes power uncomfortable. I dismissed it then, but now I see that you were right. I have lived most of my life believing silence was synonymous with elegance, that a house must be spotless, that voices should be measured, that history was something to be curated, not confronted. But silence, my silence, built a wall around me, and in keeping the noise out, I also kept out the truth. I watched you stand in the garden, not as a maid, but as a monument to everything I failed to be. Strong, honest, compassionate. I hated you for it. But today, I envy you. I will not ask for forgiveness. That would be too easy, and I have not earned it. But I want you to know that I am no longer proud of the legacy I defended. The estate is yours now in spirit, if not in law. That means more than property. It means influence. It means impact. Do more than I did. Please, make this place something worth remembering. Elaine." Maya stared at the final line for a long time. It wasn't an apology, not in the traditional sense, but it was something deeper. A surrender, a reckoning, a reluctant passing of the torch. She folded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it in the small wooden box where she kept her most important items, her mother's bracelet, Elijah's hospital tag, and now this. Later that afternoon, Maya met Charles on the garden path. Spring had arrived in full bloom. Tulips danced gently in the wind, and the faint smell of soil and new life filled the air. "She wrote to me," Maya said. "I figured she might," he replied. "She left this morning. No word on where she's headed." Maya nodded. "She's still running." "She always has," Charles said. But for the first time, she left something behind that wasn't bitterness. Maya looked out over the garden. "Do you think people can really change?" Charles thought a moment. Maybe not all at once, but they can start. Maya turned to him. I want to hold a ceremony here, for the people who never got their names remembered. A memorial. Quiet. Dignified. Charles nodded. I'll support it. I'm not asking for support, she said. I'm telling you what's happening. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Understood. 2 weeks later, the garden was transformed. Rows of folding chairs were placed beneath the elm trees. A small platform was built from reclaimed oak, and on it stood a single plaque that read, To the hands who held this house together, you are not forgotten. Abu. Dozens attended, former staff, their families, community members who had heard Maya's story and felt seen by it. There was no press, no microphones, no speeches written by aides. Maya stepped forward, holding the house journal in her hands. These names, she said, voice trembling just slightly, are not ghosts. They were people, workers, mothers, fathers, sacrificed at the altar of silence and structure. She began reading the names, one by one. David Robbins, Eleanor Sims, Marjorie Hill, Isaac Green. Some in the crowd wept. Others closed their eyes and bowed their heads. After the final name, she looked up. This garden will grow because of you, she said, and so will the truth. When she stepped down, Elijah ran to her and took her hand. Were those the forgotten people? He asked. Yes, she whispered, but not anymore. That evening, as the lanterns flickered in the trees and guests departed in hushed reverence, Maya returned to the house and walked the halls slowly. She passed portraits that no longer intimidated her. She passed rooms that now served purpose rather than power. At the foot of the main staircase, she paused. For a moment, she imagined the house breathing no longer a monument to control, but to conscience. She had become more than a voice. She had become an anchor for others, and finally, for herself. The war wasn't over. There would be more to fight, more stories to carry, but the house had changed, and so had she. Forever, the foundation had grown beyond what Maya could have imagined. What had started as one woman's testimony in a forgotten garden had now spread to 5 cities, 4 states, and over 100 workers protected by a living network of advocates. Yet with every layer of justice peeled back, another bruise of truth surfaced, older, deeper. And it was one of those bruises that came knocking at the Fairview estate. A man named Samuel Dawson, in his late 60s, wearing a navy work coat and eyes dulled by decades of silence, stood at the gates asking for Maya. He carried only a photograph, wrinkled, faded, black and white. In it, 2 young black women stood side by side, in crisp uniforms with white aprons, smiling shyly. The corner was labeled in pen, Fairview, 1971. Maya met him on the garden bench, the one near the rosemary bushes. That's my sister, he said, pointing to the woman on the right, Sarah Dawson. She worked here when I was still in high school, but she never came home. One day, she just disappeared. Maya studied the picture. She worked here? Are you sure? Samuel nodded. I came once to visit her. I never got past the gate. The man at the front told me there was no Miss Dawson here, that I must be mistaken. Maya's voice dropped. Did your family ever file a report? Back then, no one would have listened, not to us. His voice cracked. Mama died waiting. Daddy never forgave himself. He looked at Maya, his hands trembling as he held the photograph. I heard about what you're doing. About the journal. I thought, maybe there's something here. A record. A name. Anything. Maya placed a hand on his. We'll find her. I promise. That evening, Maya and Charles returned to the West Wing. The house journal was extensive but incomplete. Gaps in the 1,970 seconds were common, whole months, undocumented, names scratched out. It's almost like someone went out of their way to erase them, Charles murmured. Someone did, Maya replied. Probably your grandfather. Or your mother. In the margins of a 1,971 entry, barely visible beneath smudges and age, Maya found something, a half-erased line. Dismissal of SD, unauthorized contact with outside party. Her heart raced. SD Sarah Dawson. They covered it up. Charles pulled out an old blueprint of the house. Back then, there were additional storage rooms. Some were sealed when the east wing was remodeled in the 82nds. Show me. They followed the blueprint to the base of the west staircase. Behind a bookshelf built into the wall, they discovered it an old wooden door, long painted over. With a crowbar and steady hands, they pried it open. Dust clouded the air. Inside was a small, windowless room. A single cot. A broken lamp. A stack of moldy cleaning rags. And on the far wall, carved faintly into the wood, SD was here. Vous. Maya stepped back, hand over her mouth. She was imprisoned, she whispered. They kept her here. Charles looked pale. My God. There's no record of her leaving. That means she never did. They searched the space inch by inch but found no body, no bones, only silence. Yet it screamed louder than any grave. The next morning, Maya called Samuel. They stood together in the small room, the carved letters lit by flashlight. Samuel fell to his knees. She was here, he said, tears streaming down his face. All this time, she was here. Maya knelt beside him. We'll give her a name. A story. A homecoming. I promise. Within a week, Maya held a press conference not in the front courtyard, but in the very garden where she once ate grass. She stood at the same podium, only now the nameplate read, Maya Williams, Director, the Dawson Foundation for Domestic Justice. She told Sarah's story. The truth, unredacted. She was not lost, Maya declared. She was erased, and we're rewriting her back into history. The story broke national news. Investigations were launched into other estates across the state. Workers began coming forward with similar stories, silent firings, disappearances, threats masked as policy. The public demanded answers. Inside the estate, Charles paced. This changes everything, he said. If this gets worse. It's already worse, Maya said. The question is, what do we do with that? Charles sighed. The board's nervous. Investors are pulling support from the Fairview brand. Then it's time the brand stood for something more than luxury, she said. It's time it stood for justice. He looked at her. You'd be willing to risk it all for this? Maya's eyes locked with his. There was a time I ate grass so my son could eat. I've already risked everything. Now, I fight for those who still don't have a voice. No. That night, Elijah curled beside her on the couch. Is Miss Sarah in heaven now? He asked sleepily. Maya held him close. I think she's finally at peace. He looked up at her. Because of you? She shook her head gently. Because someone remembered. And as Elijah drifted off to sleep, Maya stared out at the garden, no longer a place of hiding, but of healing. Sarah Dawson had been found, and with her, a piece of Maya's purpose was made whole. The dining hall of the Fairview estate had never looked like this. No chandeliers dimmed to cast elitist shadows. No polished silverware set in perfect, intimidating symmetry. This time, the room was filled with folding chairs and clipboards, stacks of legislation drafts, and the smell of strong coffee and fresh bagels from the local deli down the road. Maya stood at the front of the room, a digital projector behind her beaming the bold title, Domestic Workers' Bill of Equity, Draft Hasson. Around the table sat lawyers, advocates, historians, and former domestic workers, each of them invited, each of them heard. We're not writing policy, Maya began, scanning the room. We're writing protection. For the invisible, the overlooked, the ones who never had a seat at this table until today. She clicked the first slide, a list of names, not officials, not donors, but people like Sarah Dawson, Eleanor Sims, David Robbins. These names remind us what silence cost, Maya continued, and what truth requires. A woman at the back raised her hand. Gloria Rains, former housekeeper and now director of the Southern Workers Network. How do we keep this from becoming another symbolic gesture, she asked. We've seen plenty of those. Maya mit hergaze. Because it's not symbolic when the people who lived the struggle write the solution. The room nodded in agreement. Upstairs, Charles stood in the hallway outside the now unlocked east wing. He paused in front of his mother's old bedroom, hand resting on the knob. He hadn't opened this door since she'd left, not since her letter to Maya. Slowly, he entered. The room was untouched, ornate, cold, and too perfectly preserved. On the vanity sat the pearl necklace she wore the night of the infamous donor gala. Next to it, a note tucked beneath a leather-bound book. He opened it. Charles, if you're reading this, I've left the Fairview name behind. Not in shame. In truth. For too long, I believed we could control legacy by preserving illusion. But illusion is a brittle shield. Your father once said, "Wealth is power. Power is safety." I repeated that line so often, I believed it. I built walls to feel safe. But walls only keep people out, they don't protect what's inside. You were right to trust her, Maya. She's not a threat to our legacy. She's its salvation. Don't let the name define the house. Let the house earn the name. Mother. Charles closed the book gently, then he turned and walked out, leaving the door open for the first time in years. Back downstairs, as the work session wrapped, Maya lingered by the long window overlooking the west garden, the same garden where she once knelt, humiliated and starved. Now it was blooming. Tulips, hydrangeas, wildflowers that Elijah helped plant, and at the center, the memorial stone for Sarah Dawson. People came there now to leave notes, prayers, tokens of memory and gratitude. Maya turned as Bernard entered with a tray. Tea? He asked. Only if it's strong. She smiled. Bernard poured with practiced grace. Never thought I'd see the day we held court in the old hall. No. Feels right, doesn't it? He nodded. My grandmother scrubbed those floors in silence. Today, her name's on that wall outside the archive. That matters. Maya sipped slowly. It does. That evening, Charles and Maya sat on the front steps, watching the sun dip low over the tree line. Elijah's sleeping early, he said. School wore him out, Maya replied. He made a speech today about Sarah in his class. The teacher cried. Charles smiled. He's got your fire. Maya leaned back. And your stubbornness. They sat quietly for a moment before Charles said, I've been thinking. Oh no, she teased. Here we go. I want to restructure the estate legally. Transfer majority ownership of the Fairview Foundation to a community trust. Maya turned to him, eyes sharp. That's huge, Charles. You sure? I'm sure, he said. This house used to serve the powerful. Now, it needs to serve the people. She studied him. You're ready to let go of the name. I'm not letting go, he said. I'm giving it new meaning. Maya reached out and took his hand. Then let's write that meaning together. That weekend, a small, private ceremony was held beneath the elm trees. There was no ribbon cutting, no press, just truth. Maya stood beside a new plaque, recently affixed near the garden walkway. It read, The Fairview House of Voice, founded by the many, led by the brave. And beneath it, in memory of those whose labor built these walls, in honor of those who broke them open, Elijah placed a sunflower at its base. A new era had begun. The rain came suddenly that Monday afternoon long, soaking sheets that clung to the windows and softened the sharp edges of the estate's silhouette. Maya sat in the archive room, surrounded by boxes of historical records recently unearthed during renovations. Dust danced in the light. As she carefully opened one of the final crates marked, Private, F. Frederick Fairview, Charles's grandfather. The man who built the empire, and by all accounts, built its silence too. Inside the crate were 3 reel-to-reel tapes, each labeled only by date, no names, no titles. She called out to Bernard, who had become the unofficial historian since the archives began. Do we have a player for these? He appeared a moment later, setting down a dusty old machine with a lopsided smile. Found this in the basement next to a box of expired brandy. Oh, they threaded the first tape together. A soft hiss, then a voice deep, methodical, unmistakably Frederick Fairview. The 7th of April 1970. 1. Removed SD from staff registry. Her brother appeared unannounced. Took no chances. Staff must understand boundaries. We provide opportunity. Discipline must maintain order. No exceptions. Maya froze. SD Sarah Dawson. This was a confession. Bernard's jaw tightened. He knew, all along. She played the second tape. The 18th of July 1973. New maid, E. Sims, caught speaking to kitchen staff about wages. Removed. Charles is too soft. We'll need to instruct Elaine to reinforce order. Maya pressed stop. They both sat in silence. Then she turned to Bernard. We need to call Charles. An hour later, Charles stood beside her in the archive room, listening to the final tape with arms folded, face unreadable. The 2nd of September 1979. Discussed possible exposure risks. If records surface, deny knowledge. The house must survive, even if memory does not. The tape clicked to a stop. Charles exhaled, slowly. My grandfather wasn't just complicit. He orchestrated the entire system. Maya nodded. These tapes are proof. Names, dates, patterns, all of it. We could take this public. We will, Maya said, but not as a scandal, as a reckoning. Charles looked at her. This could destroy what's left of the Fairview name. No, she replied. It will set it free. The next morning, Maya called an emergency meeting of the Foundation's board. They gathered in the main parlor representatives from labor councils, legal advisors, and survivors of domestic worker exploitation. Maya placed a small speaker on the table and pressed play. The room was silent as the tapes filled it with the raw sound of truth, evidence. Not opinion. Legacy. Not rumor. When the last click echoed, she said, "We are the caretakers of truth now. What we do with this defines who we are." An older man named Jorge, once a live-in cook for a Fairview cousin, raised his hand. "You'll be attacked. Legacy families don't go quietly." "I'm not afraid of noise," Maya said. "I'm afraid of forgetting." The news broke 3 days later. National outlets carried the story. Secret Fairview tapes reveal systematic abuse. A special broadcast on NPR aired excerpts from the recordings. Panels formed. Lawsuits reopened. Museums and academic institutions requested access for study, but more powerful than the headlines were the letters. Hundreds of them, from retired maids, from grandchildren who had never known what happened to their missing aunts, from former estate staff who finally felt seen. "I heard my employer's voice in those tapes," one woman wrote, "and for the first time, I believed myself." Back at the estate, the calls poured in, some praising, some threatening, some begging for the story to be buried again. But Maya kept every one of them, because truth, she believed, deserved a shelf, even the ugly parts. Elijah sat beside her one evening, coloring in a notebook. "Why are people mad at you now?" he asked gently. "Because I told a truth that made powerful people uncomfortable," she replied. "Did you do the wrong thing?" She smiled. "No, sweetheart. I did the right thing at the wrong people's table." He tilted his head. "Then maybe we need a better table." She laughed softly. "Exactly." Weeks later, the Fairview estate hosted its largest event yet, the National Assembly for Domestic Equity. Maya stood once again in front of a crowd, but this time, it wasn't just workers. It was lawmakers, city officials, journalists, college students. The movement had grown far beyond her hands. "This house," she began, "was once a vault of secrets, but now it is a beacon of stories. And stories, when shared, become strength." The applause rose, not polite, not staged, but full of fire. In the back row, Charles stood beside Bernard. His tie was loose, his hands in his pockets. He leaned over and said, "She's becoming the face of a generation." Bernard nodded, and the voice of the ones we buried too deep. That night, Maya returned to the garden. She placed the old reel tapes in a sealed archival box, labeled them clearly, dated them honestly, and added them to the memorial archive beside Sarah's journal and Eleanor's letters. Truth had been hidden beneath the floorboards. Now, it stood under open sky, and it would never be silenced again. The courthouse stood like an old giant in the middle of downtown Hartford, gray, cold, and unimpressed by sentiment. It had seen decades of broken promises, botched justice, and quiet dismissals. But on this particular spring morning, it was full. Not with noise, but with presence. History was walking through its doors. Maya adjusted her navy suit jacket as she stepped through security. Elijah had begged to come, but this wasn't a day for children. This was a day for ghosts. She passed reporters huddled outside, microphones ready. One shouted, "Maya, are you hoping for damages?" She paused just long enough to answer, "No." I'm hoping for dignity. Damages can't pay back a stolen life. The reporter lowered his mic. Inside, the atmosphere was tight with expectation. The Connecticut State v. The Fairview Estate hearing wasn't just about Sarah Dawson anymore. It had grown into a class action suit filed on behalf of 26 former domestic workers, their families, and unnamed others who had been silenced through intimidation, manipulation, and, in one confirmed case, unlawful confinement. Charles sat beside Maya at the front of the courtroom, not as a defendant, but as a key witness for the prosecution. He had voluntarily turned over financial records, internal documents, and the tapes his grandfather had recorded. The same tapes now entered as evidence. The Fairview legal team was present too, though less confident than usual. The brand had suffered public fallout, investor withdrawals, and public shame. And the name Fairview, once a symbol of prestige, now came with an asterisk. The judge entered. Court was called to order. The first testimony came from Jorge Mendez. He walked slowly to the witness stand. His gait uneven, back stiff from years of kitchen labor. But his voice, when he spoke, was clear. I worked 14-hour days, no contract, no overtime. They said if I didn't like it, I could leave. But my visa depended on the job. My kids depended on the visa, so I stayed. The room held its breath. He continued, voice cracking. We were told to use the back staircases, not to speak to guests. If someone cried, we were told to send them home without pay. I saw what they did to Sarah. They erased her. And they almost erased the rest of us. Next came Estella Green, who spoke of the room she'd been locked in after being accused of taking a scarf later found in a guest's luggage. And then, the courtroom grew silent for Maya. She stepped up, placed her hand on the Bible, swore in, and looked straight ahead. I was told I could work, but not eat, she began. I was told I could serve, but not speak. I was told my hands were too dark to prepare food. So I ate grass. In a garden of roses and marble. Gasps from the audience, some tears, but Maya didn't waver. I endured it because my son was sick, because I thought silence would protect him. But I learned that silence is what keeps this system alive. The judge, a black woman in her late 50s with graying braids, leaned forward. And what do you want this court to do, Miss Williams? I want the court to name it, Maya replied. Call it what it was. Exploitation, abuse, racism wrapped in etiquette. The judge nodded once, gravely. The defense attorney attempted to shift blame, insisting it was the actions of individuals, not a system. That the tapes were dated, not proof of current behavior. But Charles took the stand next, and his voice carried the weight of history. I grew up thinking my family was noble, that this house stood for excellence. But I've learned that a well-set table can still serve injustice. My grandfather used power to protect himself. I'm here to use mine to do the opposite. He paused, looked directly at the jury. I am not asking you to destroy the Fairview name. I'm asking you to give it meaning again by holding it accountable. Deliberations took 2 days. The court reconvened on a Friday morning, air tense, every seat filled. Former staff stood beside Maya. Elijah sat in the second row, holding Bernard's hand. The judge entered. Papers shuffled. The jury forewoman stood. We, the jury, find the Fairview estate responsible for systemic labor abuse, unlawful confinement, and racial discrimination against domestic staff between the years of 1968 and 1991. Murmurs, gasps. A few cheers quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. The judge continued. As part of this ruling, the estate will issue formal restitution to named claimants, fund the establishment of a national registry for domestic worker protections, and publicly acknowledge its historical abuses through permanent memorialization. Her voice softened slightly, and let the record show, silence is no longer protection, and truth is no longer optional. The courtroom erupted not in chaos, but in catharsis. Maya closed her eyes. Sarah Dawson had been heard. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds as Maya stepped onto the courthouse steps. The crowd waited. She raised a single photo, Sarah Dawson's portrait, toward the sky. We don't bury truth anymore, she said. We raise it. That night, back at the estate, Maya and Charles walked the garden path in silence. It's done, Charles said. Maya shook her head. It's begun. They paused before the memorial stone. Fresh tulips leaned toward the moonlight. "Do you think she knows?" he asked. Maya's voice was steady. "She feels it. Justice isn't just about the past. It's about who carries it forward." And as the stars blinked above them, Maya whispered a name into the dark that had once silenced it. Sarah. 10 years later, the Fairview estate no longer bore the burden of secrecy. It had become something else entirely, a national landmark known simply as the House That Remembered. Once a symbol of wealth and silence, now it stood for testimony and transformation. Tourists didn't come to marvel at the chandeliers anymore. They came to read the names etched into the walls of the memorial garden, to hear the stories recited in Maya's voice recorded forever in the museum wing, echoing through headphones worn by visitors of every age. Maya stood on the wraparound porch with Elijah, now 17, taller than her, with his father's eyes and her fire. "You nervous?" he asked, glancing at the crowd gathering on the lawn. "No," she said truthfully. "I've already lived through the storm. This is the sunrise." Today was the 10th anniversary of the verdict, the day the court finally declared what so many already knew, that the walls of power had been built on backs that had never been acknowledged. A brass band was setting up by the garden. Folding chairs were filled with former workers, activists, students, politicians, and families. Some were descendants of those long erased. Some were simply witnesses who refused to forget. Bernard, now retired but always near, shuffled up the porch steps with 2 programs in hand. "Your name's on the first page," he said. Eyes twinkling, Maya smirked. "I told them not to make it about me. They didn't listen, because it is." She accepted the program, heart full. The opening speech was given by the new director of the foundation, a young Latina woman named Carla Ramos, who had once cleaned offices at night while studying law by day. Maya had recruited her, trained her, stepped aside for her. "Today," Carla said from the podium, "we don't gather to reopen wounds, but to water what's grown from them. This house no longer hides the truth. It invites it in, gives it tea, and asks it to stay." Laughter rippled, then silence, reverent. Carla continued. "There was a woman who once knelt in this garden, not in prayer, but in hunger. She was told her skin disqualified her from dignity. That woman chose not to burn the house down but to rebuild it, room by room, into something none of us had seen before, something called justice." Applause swelled, but Maya's eyes were fixed on the stone beyond the tulips. Sarah Dawson, 1,951, 1,971. Not lost. Found. Remembered. When it was Maya's turn to speak, she stepped to the microphone with no notes. "I don't need paper to tell you what I've lived," she began. "I came here for a job and found a silence so thick, it could choke you. I endured it for my son. I broke it for your daughters." She paused, letting the breeze carry her words. "This house used to bury names, now it plants them, and what grows from that is not guilt, it's responsibility." Faces in the crowd, young, old, black, white, brown, nodded. "I want to thank the ones who stayed when it got hard, the ones who showed up when it was dangerous, the ones who told the truth before it was convenient." She turned slightly toward the garden. "And I want to say to Sarah Dawson, your name raised 1,000 more. Your silence broke 1,000 lies. You were never a servant. You were the spark." Elijah clapped the loudest. After the speeches, music filled the air. People danced. Some cried. Others laughed in the sun, in a place that had once only allowed quiet obedience. Charles arrived later that afternoon, silver-haired now, moving slower but smiling deeply. He stood beside Maya by the plaque near the entrance, one they had commissioned together before he stepped down from public life. It read, "Truth has weight. So do those who carry it. Welcome home." "You did it," he said. "No," Maya replied. "We did it." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. "Found this cleaning out my mother's old desk. Figured it belongs to you now." Inside was a thin gold pin, shaped like a tree with roots wrapping around a name, Maya Williams. "She used to wear that," Maya whispered. Only on the rare days she felt proud. "And now it's yours," Charles said, "because we're proud." She accepted it wordlessly, overcome. As evening fell, Elijah walked with her to the edge of the garden, where a new path had been cleared. one that led down to a small stone building tucked behind the trees. It had once been a storage shed. Now, it was the Sarah Dawson Learning Center. Inside, children gathered for weekly workshops on workers' rights, history, storytelling, and leadership. Maya entered quietly, watching the young facilitator speak to the class. "Can anyone tell me why remembering matters?" A small hand shot up. "Because forgetting lets bad things happen again?" "Exactly," the teacher said. "And telling the truth is how we build better houses." Maya's eyes filled. Outside, fireflies blinked in the dusk. The house stood behind her not as a fortress, but as a witness. And she, once forced to the shadows, now stood at the center of the light, not as a maid, not even as a survivor, but as the woman who turned a house of silence into a legacy of voice. And it was only the beginning.